I'm glad you guys are here. I'm glad we're online and people are beginning to check in. I'm excited about what we're going to be sharing today. I'm Ken Winter, president of PICA presently, and I am glad that you made this time available. A couple of announcements, of course, every organization has them. Some upcoming things. Today, of course, the program is simple but not easy, and Jim Thompson is our guest by Zoom, and we'll get to introduce him in a moment. Our next Pika movie night is Thursday, June 19th, always third Thursday, and it's at Auburn Presbyterian Church, Bel Air Road, New Airport Road and Bell Road, basically. 6:30 for that, and this month's presentation is Merchants of Doubt. The theme of that will fit very well with what Jim is going to be talking about today. So I'm hoping by the time these events are past, we will all be a lot more climate literate and be able to talk about this with other people more easily. That's sort of our goal with all of this. There is kind of a special sidelight event coming up. It's not normally something I talk about in Pika. I happen to also be organizing various Firewise communities in our area. Firewise communities are groups of neighbors that sign up together to make their area more wildfire resistant. And there's an enormous amount of literature and tools available to make that happen. This is a kind of an area-wide event sponsored by Placer County, especially Saturday, June 21 in the morning, 8 to noon. And it will be at the giant CAL FIRE facility off Bowman Road by the freeway. They are encouraging neighborhoods to form Firewise communities, and I can personally endorse that. A number of people have been able to get fire insurance that they weren't able to get before or couldn't afford until they showed that they had done some of the work that the Firewise folks recommend. This is now a national organization headquartered, I think, in Boulder, Colorado, run by fire marshal. These are people who know what they're doing. But yeah.
State Farm will give you a 5% discount on your insurance if you are part of the Firewise community.
Just a little footnote, it's not automatic because you happen to be located in an area with Firewise that you are a Firewise member. No, you actually have to sign up and commit to a pretty easy set of things to do in a given year. So please don't think it's just, I happen to live here, so I'm part of a Firewise community. No, you do need to sign up and participate in that. That's where we want to move now to introduce Jim Thompson, the founder and CEO of This Is What We Did. A number of us took their program called The Week, and 1, 2, 3, 4 of us in this room anyway, and maybe some others online. He will be referring to that because that's a major program that these folks have done. And I was very impressed with how they put that together. As you must know yourself, and you speak to people who feel this way, climate change is just way too overwhelming. There's all this misinformation out there. So an opportunity like this with Jim is something I've been looking forward to, and I hope you will get a lot out of this today. Jim, if you want to rebut anything I've said about you and your organization, please feel free. We're really pleased that you're here. Thank you for showing up in this way. And you're on.
Thanks a lot. The one thing I would say is that we did not create the week. When I say we, I mean this is what we did. I was introduced to it by a friend, and I had gone to Al Gore's Climate Reality Project training in Minnesota 4 or 5 years ago. And I thought I knew everything about climate change and how bad it could be. But this friend asked me, and so I said, sure. And it was really wonderful. Even though it went over some things I already knew, it introduced me to some other things, and I just feel like one of the most important people, one of the most important things people can do is to see the week, and so we decided to promote it. And um, if you don't need to wait for us, you could just get a bunch of people and go to their website. But if you want, we're going to make it easier for people to do it. But that's all. Everything else was pretty close to the truth. And I do want to thank you all for not only for inviting me to share what I think I've learned. Um, I, I used to work for the Oregon Department of Energy, and one of the things I did was I worked on legislative stuff. And the head of the Home Builders Association gave a talk once, and he ended it by saying, "Okay, I've already told you more than I know," which got a laugh. And so hopefully I won't tell you more than I really know. But let's go to the screen here. So this is what we did. The name came from an old movie that I remember. I don't even know if I saw the movie. It was called "What Did You Do in the War, Daddy?" And it was about after World War II, German children asking their older relatives what they do in the war, and the answers were not, for the most part, were not great. And I think we could be in a similar. Well, I think we will be in a similar situation. That um, if we don't ask ourselves, um, what is it we want to do to fight climate change? The name of the organization came from a statement. We want to be able to say, this is what we did to fight climate change and feel good about it. I was I met a friend a while back, and she worked for one of the biggest venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And he asked me what I was doing, and so I mentioned it, and he said, "Well, let me give you some free advice. Change the name." But the name said exactly what we wanted to say, which is we're going to be confronted with a moment. Maybe it's actual, where a young person that we're connected with asks us, "What do we do?" And I just want to mention that the picture at the top is from Cayucas, California, and that's my granddaughter, Lila, who's now a fourth grader, or actually she just got done with school. So much, if not most, of my professional life was spent with youth sports. I saw so much negativity that I thought, well, maybe I can make a difference there. And that's where Positive Coaching Alliance came from. Positive Coaching Alliance was a certainly more than 40-hour a week job for me, 60, 70, maybe even 80 hours a week. And so I knew there was I knew a little bit about climate change. I had no idea just how bad it was. Oh, and here's the ultimate question. What did you do in the war against global climate change, Granddaddy? And we don't want to be in a situation where we're going to hide our face from that young person. So when I started Positive Coaching Alliance, I spent a lot of time thinking about what was the problem in youth sports, so that we would focus on the problem and not get distracted by other things. And this took me back to when I was in college, the summer between my sophomore and junior years, I think, in Minneapolis, St. Paul. My roommate, Craig, got a bus, and he was out in the backyard working on it one day. I was in the kitchen, probably trying to find something to eat. And all of a sudden I heard Craig scream, just an awful scream. I ran out and I found that he had trapped his thumb between two pieces of steel. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to get him out of this. And for the, I could not figure out where to put the pressure to release his thumb. David, who lived with us also, came running out, and maybe because David grew up on a farm, he diagnosed the problem more quickly, and he put the wrench in the right place to release the pressure so that Craig could take his hand out. To me, that's a good indication of, we can work really, really hard, but it'd be so much better if we knew where the leverage was, where the point was that we could have the most impact. And I'm glad to inform you that Craig's thumb is fine. And this was a long time ago, but I talked to him a while back, and he does not remember this incident at all. But it did happen. So I want to start by sharing what I think the problem is. And I've said this, the problem, simply put. The title of this talk is Simple but Not Easy. I think the problem is simple and very, very difficult to succeed with. The first item is that the fossil fuel industry is able to spew their waste and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere with no cost or no penalty. Can we think of other companies where we would allow them to sell a product that was destroying a part of our livability? I can't. The second part is that think of a Hiroshima bomb, and got this from James Hansen, who's now at Columbia, and he's been called the Paul Revere of the climate problem because he was trying to warn people about this 20, 30 years ago. And just think of the heat generated by one bomb, equivalent of the one dropped on Hiroshima. And then think about 400,000 to 500,000 of those bombs exploding, and the heat increasing the temperature of our world. Now, the fossil fuel industry won't quit because there is so much money to be made or lost. Many fossil fuel industries have fossil fuel assets that are on their they're already on their balance statement, but they have not gotten them out of the ground yet, and they haven't sold them yet. Now, I wasn't a stellar student in business school, but I did understand that if you have something on your balance sheet and you're not able to take advantage of it, that can cause what's called stranded assets, when you have to give up on something. And one estimate I saw some time ago was that the fossil fuel companies have $27 trillion of assets that are in the ground and also on their assets, their statements. So when I say fossil fuel industry, the leaders of that are going to do almost everything they can. I say almost everything because there may be a limit, but they're certainly not limited by a concern with making this only planet we have habitable. It really isn't that early on a Sunday morning, but please forgive me. So, oh, and I gave a talk recently, and a woman, I said something about along the lines of the fossil fuel industry being the doing the evil things, and she said, my husband worked in the oil industry for a long time, which was really great because I was able to say to her, we're not looking to blame people, except the people who are making the decisions. And the decision makers in the fossil fuel industry, not the people who are just working there and doing their job. Um, I think we could, I really think they should be um, arrested and tried for that. Government doesn't act because it is controlled by the fossil fuel industries. And here I want to say both political parties. Um, we may think that, boy, the Republicans and the Trump administration are doing horrible things. But the Democratic Party for many years has wanted to have it both ways. They've wanted to appeal to certain kinds of voters and also not cut down the um, donations from uh, the fossil fuel industry. And the final thing is, if we don't neutralize the power of the fossil fuel industry, we're doomed. Let me just ask if anybody has any reaction to this. Is this too simple? Is this uh, overstating what the problem is? Or does this sum up in a few words what the problem is? And I would love to have anybody's take on this that they would like to.
It sums it up perfectly, and we're doomed if they don't change, if we don't change.
So are you agreeing with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I looked at your website a few months ago, and one thing that I was struck by was this point you're making that the Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, they don't really stop this because it's the source of their funding too.
I don't want to paint an entire party with the same brush. I was a supporter of Bernie Sanders, and when he ran for president in 2016, I guess it was, he proposed a Green New Deal of $16 trillion, not only to take care of the problem in our country, but to have a fund that we could use to get other countries to do the right thing in their own company. So I'm not saying every Democratic Party member is this, but I think a lot of them, like, anyway, thanks for agreeing with me. Any other thoughts?
I think you're very right with all the points that you've made. The problem to me is that climate change, while it's happening way too rapidly for us, it feels very slow, and people couldn't just laugh it off and say, not yet.
Um, I think the fossil fuel industry, as you say, is the crux of our problem. And they've done regulatory capture on a mass scale. And what you're doing, educating people to that fact
the most important thing we can do. The second most important thing is to act on it and elect enough people who are sympathetic to the idea of nationalizing the fossil fuel industry so that it can be controlled. Something that we need to think about.
Thank you. I like the term regulatory capture, and if you don't mind, I will use that in the future because I think it really does describe what is happening here. So let's see what's next here. If somebody does disagree with any of this or think it's wrong-headed or whatever, and you don't feel comfortable sharing that, please put something in the chat, and you can send it just to me so nobody else will see it. But I really do value people who challenge things I'm saying. So I retired as the CEO, founder and CEO of Positive Coaching Alliance. God, it's almost 5 years now, 4 or 5 years. And I had always wanted to go to Cuba, but working as much as I did, I just couldn't do it. And then all of a sudden, I was I was given I asked for it and was given a sabbatical by my board. And all of a sudden, I realized, hey, we could go to Cuba. I had read about the Bay of Pigs as a crucial battle in the Castro Cubans attempt to keep the United States from taking over. But I didn't realize that the Bay of Pigs is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And the water is so clean, and they had some corals there that, unlike so many of the corals around the world, were full of life and full of color. One day in our trip, I looked at the agenda for that day, and it said we were going to the Literacy Museum, and I thought, okay, well, might be something interesting there. Before I went, somebody, and I cannot remember who it was, said to me, you know what's likely to happen is you're going to go to Cuba thinking there's nothing to learn about climate change, and something's going to happen that's going to spark you. And that's exactly what happened. Because the Literacy Museum told a story of something that was incredibly exciting. When Castro took over, the estimates were that 80% of Cubans were illiterate. And a campaign was started to get school kids, and here you see someone getting on board a train, going into the hills to teach older Cubans how to read and write. So mostly it was high school kids, but there were tutors as young as 9 years old, and this 102-year-old woman, she said, I've never felt like a real Cuban, because she couldn't write her name, and she was able to write her name after this. I just thought it was incredibly inspiring. Castro's goal was to eliminate illiteracy in 1 year, 1961. And he claimed success. I don't know if 100% of illiteracy was wiped out, but it made a huge difference in the country. Now, in January 1962, Castro declared Cuba as literate, 100% literate. And as I say, I don't know if it's 100%, but and this was a demonstration in the streets of Havana. And if you see all these people, many of them women, do you see what they're holding? Giant pencils, yes. And I think now, like that young boy I just showed you a picture of, who was 9 years old at the time, he's in it. If he's still alive, he's in his 70s now. That was a long time ago. So when I got home and I decided I wanted to start 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 an organization to help create a movement, I came with this idea of climate change literacy. And I think people can be illiterate in a way that they can decode words, but not necessarily understand the implications of them. And I think there's a lot of people, well-meaning people, who are illiterate about climate change. And I realize that's a little bit of a arrogant thing for me to say, but so I came up with 5 things. And if you go to our website, we actually have a quiz. And I like to tell people climate change isn't fun, but our climate change literacy quiz is kind of fun. So the first question is how bad and how soon? Second is, what are the available solutions? Third, why are the solutions not being used to scale? What's the degree of mobilization required? And let's take a look at these. How bad and how soon? Well, a few years ago, when I stepped away from Positive Coaching Alliance and really started to learn about climate change, Sandy's from Minnesota and I'm from North Dakota, but my parents had a lake cabin in Minnesota. And I was thinking, Minnesota might be a good place to go to avoid climate change. And not now. If you know what's going on there right now, it's awful. And the Boundary Waters canoe area is one of the most beautiful places in the world. We've canoed there many times. And now there's runaway wildfires there. So how bad is it? It's really bad. And available solutions, well, actually, there are a lot of them. One of the things President Biden, I can criticize him for a number of things, but one of the things I was impressed with that he was able to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. Somehow he made a compromise with West Virginia Senator, forgetting his name, but very much a coal-oriented guy. And the IRA really promoted some things that we need to promote in a big, big way. If there are so many solutions available that aren't being used or aren't being used at scale. So why aren't they being used at scale? Well, we already talked about regulatory capture, the power of the fossil fuel industry. My wife said recently at a meeting that she was, what we were talking about, we were grateful for, and she said she was grateful for China. And I commented that, being grateful to China for the steps it's taking on climate change doesn't mean I agree with everything the Chinese government is doing. But in terms of climate change, they're doing amazing things. They just lowered the price of BYD, and I don't even know what BYD stands for, but it's a big car company there. So then the question is, what is the degree of mobilization required? And I compare that to the Second World War. I think there is I spent a lot of time reading about the mobilization for the Second World War, and there are some historians who say the reason we defeated, the Allies defeated the Japan and Germany was because of the manufacturing power we were able to bring to bear on this. Um, and some people say, well, yeah, but we're too divided now. Well, no, I'm not sure we were more divided now than we were then. Um, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was hated by Henry Ford and many industrialists. He was considered to be a communist. And yet, we were able to mobilize. One story I really love is Ford Motors built a new factory. It was Willow Run, I think it was called, and it was a mile long. And it was to produce B-29, B-24, Liberator bombers that my mom actually worked on as a Rosie the Riveter in San Diego. And my uncle Wally flew them in New York. And the most astonishing thing was that at its peak, the Willow Run plant was producing one B-24 Liberation bomber every hour. And that was a time when the country was very divided. And then let's go to the next one, which is the kind of mass movement needed. There was a lot of conflict in the country. Like I say, a lot of folks really thought Franklin Delano Roosevelt was destroying the country. But I think what made it happen was this huge mobilization of people. I may get this number a little wrong, but I was reading about, I can't remember what they're called now, victory gardens. Victory gardens, and my calculations looking at the number of people that lived in the country at the time and the number of victory gardens that were done, it was like over half of the people had victory gardens. And of course, women stepped up when so many men went to war, like my mom and so many Rosie the Riveters, that mass movement allowed the mobilization to happen. Let me pause here and see if there's any thoughts or reactions to this idea of the 5 elements of climate change literacy. How bad it is, way worse than most people think and already hear.
Fascist industrialists like Henry Ford did not set up plants for the war effort out of the goodness of their heart or out of patriotism. They did so because they were forced to by FDR. It took leadership.
Thank you. And the story is that FDR had a bunch of activists in his office, and I don't know what they were arguing about, but he said at the end of it, he said, okay, you've convinced me. Now go out there and make me do it. You're right, but it wasn't just FDR's personal power. People mobilized to support it. But thank you for that comment. That was really good.
Yeah, it was people. My good friend Clarence Beam was a machinist at the Caterpillar factory in the Midwest, and he helped to organize that factory during the war. And up until that point, if you tried to organize a factory, they'd shoot you down.
Yeah.
But during the war, the workers and the materials they were making were so needed that the industrialists had to to cave in.
I agree with that. And part of it was the power of the unions, the power of the workers that made that all happen. Any other
Jim,
thoughts?
I have a comment.
Please.
The examples you gave on mobilization and so on were all for building more things. When you pick the World War II era, you're talking about mass mobilization of the war effort and materiel. I'm not sure how well that fits with climate changes that we do need to make.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, Jim. I'm also a little bit questioning the metaphor because as did the others of us, I went to the week, and I remember part of the discussion in the third section of the week was how the country mobilized to solve the problem during World War II, and so we should be able to do that again. And of course, we should, and we could. However, it seems to me one of the big differences is that the whole World War II, when we got involved, it was because the country had experienced Pearl Harbor and we had witnessed the horrible violence of our ships being sunk and our soldiers being killed. And we were therefore at an obvious point of war. The problem, it seems to me, and they point this out in the week, everything kind of happens in this sort of not very slow, maybe, but gradual, incremental indications of the climate problem. So if you're not in Minnesota, as I'm not, I think it was Minnesota, I didn't even know about these wildfires there. I know about the ones in Canada as it happens, but stuff happens. It happens in different places. It happens with increasing frequency, but it's easy not to see the whole thing. And
Yes.
how do we convince the country that we have a dire national and, in fact, global issue that we need to respond to very, very rapidly?
Thank you. One of the initiatives we started um, is called Effective Climate Conversations. Catherine Hayhoe, who is with Texas Tech and also the Nature Conservancy, has said that how can you care about something if you don't talk about it? And if you don't care about it, you won't act on it. So we have a terrific educational program on effective climate conversations. And I say that because of the feedback we've gotten from the people who've taken the class.
I did this with Jim and it was really good. So if anyone wants to know anything about it, I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. It was a very good series of trainings, and we have the link to This Is What I Did and to this idea of effective climate conversations on our website. So you can go there and get them there at the PICA website. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Okay. This is an exercise that our minister, Dana Bainbridge, we go to the Disciples of Christ Church in downtown San Jose, urban sanctuary. And she asked members of the congregation over the summer to think about a situation when their mind has changed. It could be trivial, like, I used to really dislike mayonnaise and now I like it. But I gave a talk last Sunday, actually. And the way I used to think was I whined about why climate change had to happen in my lifetime. Why couldn't I retire and take it easy? And here's how my mind has changed. I realized that regardless of when I lived, I will age and die. And climate change gives me the chance to face one last mighty challenge. So I don't know if many of you remember John Bradshaw. He I thought was a very insightful writer. I once heard him when he was doing a lecture for PBS on fundraising. And I had always thought that identity was something that we figured out between our time we're 18 and 22 maybe, and then it stays the same. And what Bradshaw said was every time um, our life changes in major ways, we have to reestablish, refresh our identity. So you think about a kid, a toddler who's living at home, and at a certain point, it's time for her or him to go to school. And that can be a really terrifying thing because, I know who I was when I was living with mom and dad, my siblings, but now there's all these other kids. And so he laid out several ages of our life where we had to refresh our identity. And I hope Epictetus is next. Let's see. What would have become of Hercules, do you think, if there had been no lion, no hydra, stag, or boar, and no savage criminals to rid the world of? What would he have done in the absence of such challenges? Obviously, he would have just rolled over in bed and gone back to sleep. So by snoring his life away in luxury and comfort, he would never have developed into the mighty Hercules. And even if he had, what good would it have done him? What would have been the use of those arms, that physique, and that noble soul without crises or conditions to stir him into action? That's kind of a clarion call. And I want to share something that a story I heard many, many years ago was about a man who was stuck in a snowstorm. He was in his car, and he didn't get out of the car and run away. So that would have been the worst thing he could have done. But he basically did everything wrong except one thing, and that was he had his lights flash. That if you're in a snowstorm, seeing just a straight shot of a light, you're more likely to see it if it's blinking. So I often think about that because I don't always jump out of bed saying, hey, I want to emulate Hercules today. There are times when I feel strong and I feel I can do something significant about climate change. And then there are times when I feel like, oh man. And in those times when I don't necessarily have my confidence, I think about the man in a snowstorm who did one thing right, and that saved him. So I go back and forth between, I'm the latest version of Hercules, and I don't know what to do, but let me see if I can do one thing right now. Well, let me stop and ask, does that speak to anybody?
Here's a comment.
My comment is I'm glad you brought up John Bradshaw, who spoke for years on how people change or don't change. And he equated himself as one voice crying in the wilderness because people didn't seem to make those changes very quick unless they themselves were in some kind of distress. And sometimes a state of grace just has to hit you on the head before you actually do anything.
That's really beautiful. When my mom moved to California after she had retired, she got into a senior center called High House. And I remember taking her the first day um, where she was going to move into this place. And she grabbed my hand, and I had this feeling of going back 60 years and my mom taking my hand as she took me into first grade. That there's so many challenges that come with different times in our life. And thank you for that statement about John Bradshaw. Um, I think he wrote a book, something like, It's Never Too Late to Have a Happy Childhood. So, any other thoughts about Hercules and Man on a Snowstorm? And the reason I pair these together is because there might have been a time in my life when I was robustly chasing the idea of being Hercules-like. And when I have those moments, I try to act. And the other time, I try to find one thing that's the right thing to do. So I heard this recently, something somebody said on the web, and she described the two kinds of happiness. The happiness in your life. Well, I love breakfast at Hobie's restaurant in Palo Alto. That's happiness in my life. And then she said, and happiness with your life. Do you feel good about how you lived your life and what you've accomplished? And again, I'm overwhelmed by the size of the issue that we're facing, but in a strange way, I'm grateful that I'm alive right now and still have my faculties, and I can weigh in on this, the greatest threat in the history of humanity. So I have one more slide I'd like to share with you. This is from our backyard. That's St. Francis of Assisi. I heard a talk when somebody said, St. Francis, not too long before he died, said, I am at peace because I have done what I have been given to do. I actually have a little sign right up on my wall here. It says, what is it that I have been given to do? And I think about that often. So 4 things that we're working on. One is to promote the week. Really encourage you to do it and not to stop after the first film. It can be kind of grim, talking about how bad things are. The second film talks about how we got where we are. And the third one is examples of things we can do. We started this is what we did with moving your money. We thought that this would be an easy way for people to fight climate change by moving their money out of climate bad banks. We kind of discovered, this may be an overstatement, but not by too much, that just about every bank is a climate bad bank, and that we encourage people, if it's possible, if it works for you, to move your money into a credit union. And then we also have well, I mentioned the effective climate conversations before and appreciate the good words was said about it. We also have a workshop that my wife and another member of our team worked on called Anxiety into Action. The research shows that young people are often terrified about climate change. My granddaughter came to our church one day, and our minister talked about climate change leading to the end of the world. Well, I didn't even hear that, but she heard it, and she went home and talked to her mother. It's like she was so freaked out about that. And so anxiety into action is shares with parents and grandparents and caregivers how you can help young people uh, deal with their anxiety about climate change. And as the title says, the number one thing you can do is to find some action that you can take, and that often relieves the anxiety. Let me just pause there, or maybe maybe I'm done, but I'm certainly open to questions or comments. Um, Particularly if you disagree with something I said, I'm open to hearing that, because once or twice in my 76 years, I've been wrong. So,
There was an article in the Sacramento Bee recently about the oil companies being sued for wrongful death, a woman that died in the heat wave. And so that prodded me to start doing a little research on all the dozens and dozens of lawsuits against the oil companies that are going on right now. And based on what I've read, there is ample evidence to convict them. It's a matter of when that's going to happen, and when that conviction will take place. They will be obligated to do reparations for all of the wildfires, the floods, and so on. And I think what that could result in is we might see $20 a gallon gas, because they'll just pass it on to the consumer. And maybe eventually we'll get people to uh, find it in their monetary uh, uh, inclination to choose the more sustainable options.
yeah, I'm not sure the exact bill you're talking about, but I know there's one called, or Make the Oil Companies Pay, I think is,
Make
um,
polluters pay.
Make Polluters
Make
Pay.
polluters pay.
Thank you. Yeah. Um, I think, um, I think the number one thing that we need to do is to build a great, strong movement that can um, match the power of the fossil fuel industry. Also, there was a speech by the head of the United Nations, and I can't remember his name right now, but he gave a talk last year, and he referred to the movie called Everything Everywhere Now at Once. Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I didn't see that movie, but his point was um, every little thing we can do. That's going back to the guy stuck in a snowstorm. Every little thing we can do. Um, and I think you may have heard of our Children's Trust, which has been suing uh, in Montana and Hawaii and maybe some other states too. They've been suing the state because the Montana Constitution guarantees people in Montana a safe environment. And not all of these are succeeding, but all of them are requiring the fossil fuel industry to um, gear up, to spend money to try to stop them. And I think it was Bill McKibben who once said, I heard him talk, and he was saying that um, it's easier for the fossil fuel industry to control Congress because all the Congress people are in one place. But at the state and local level, that can really stretch the resources of the fossil fuel industry. So better, bigger movement, and everything, everywhere, all at once.
And I would also add publicity about all of that so that it becomes more widely known as it happens. Linda?
Hi, Jim. I know you've talked about one of the programs you have is Move Your Money. And I just wanted to say something about that because Barb and several of us participated in a four-person little work group through your organization a few years ago. And I got a Green America credit card. I moved one of my American funds that had no commitment to any attempt to, at the time we could say something, about, I forget, but the diversity, all the stuff we can't talk about now, we could talk about, and I moved it to a green fund who ended up doing better than the American funds. My point in sharing this is you're really talking to a group of believers here. Um, and I've wondered if maybe some of the group here might want to participate in one of the little workshops that you offer because you brought information about websites that will help you grade the investments you have. You put in the numbers of the webs of the investments, and it tells you if they're rated A to F, and almost everything is D and F, but there's some that are really good, and it helps you get to how to get the right bank and different kinds of credit cards. And so when we're talking about divesting the fossil fuel companies of their money is coming from us.
That's right.
It's coming from our investments. And so I was hoping, and I just kind of wondered if I wanted you to put in a plug, I guess, for how some of our people who come might like to get more specific with this is what we did to move their money. It's kind of a hassle, but on the other hand, this whole saying money talks. If they don't have the money, they can't use it to destroy our planet.
Thank you. And the other part of it is that Diane Holt, one of our team, is when she moved her money out of the bank. I can't remember which bank it was, but she said she felt so clean for the first time. So the amount of money that she, unless she's a lot more wealthy than I think she is, the amount of money that she moved probably didn't cause the CEO of the bank to get nervous, but it made her feel better. And we've gone with there's a couple ways we can do the move your money. We started out with cohorts, and it would take like 6 weeks, and we had a step-by-step process for people to move their money. And now Lee Evans, who's I used to say she was 100% of our employees, but she's no longer, because we just hired Alyssa Cortez, who is our digital marketing person, and you're going to see a lot from her. Anyway, Lee worked with a whole bunch of people, including some third act people, to, instead of getting people together in in a cohort, which didn't work for a lot of people, we now have it that you can go to our site, and there'll be a list of people who can help you, and you can do it. So, for example, some people may not need much help, but if you start to do this yourself and you get stuck, you can call on one of our facilitators to help you. And if you don't know how to get started, you can do the same thing.
Jim, I'd like to just share with our group here, PICA, Placer Earth Care Action, has board meetings once a month. And in our most recent board meeting, we took the first part of our time and talked about what we were doing personally for the planet and what we were doing as part of a group that we might be a part of, say a faith community and so on. And I'm just one of maybe 8 online at the time, and I'm listening to this, And by the time we got done, it was very impressive amount of effort and forethought that these people had expended. So you talk about everything everywhere all at once. Absolutely. And I experienced that in that board meeting, even with just those 8 people.
Yeah.
Um, so I hope others of you might have that experience as well. Shirley, I'm going to give the mic to you.
Let me give you an example. A few years ago now, it might be 3 even, I participated, I grew up in North Dakota, Minnesota, and Enbridge was trying to get Line 3 through, dirty coal, dirty fracked oil through Minnesota, right to the area where my parents used to have a lake cabin. And so a bunch of us decided we were going to go and support that demonstration. And I told my wife, well, I'm not going to get arrested. But when it happened, they said that, the people who want to be arrestable should go here. And I thought, well, I've come all this way. Why not do it? So I did get arrested, and proud of it actually. But the point I want to make is that my friend Don, who had a house near there, um, afterwards he let our whole group stay at his house and his brother-in-law's house. Um, and afterwards, I got an email from him saying that he had decided to run for, I think it was the electric co-op that served his area. And so he's on the board of the electric co-op now. Um, can a revolution come from electric co-op? No, but it's one more place where um, we can take action against uh, fossil fuels.
Jim, I have a remark to make.
Please.
It seems to me that all the things that we little people do are very important. But going back to your story about FDR and the people in his office convincing him that make me do it, we need some people in our current office of the president to convince him to do it instead of the drilling. We need to have him change policy at the top level in order for us to get where we need to go, my opinion.
Yes, thanks a lot. I long time ago, I got to know Doug Burgum. He went to Stanford Business School like I did. And my mom, when I graduated, my mom put a little notice in the Fargo Forum. And so he called me and said, hey, next time you come to Fargo, come visit me. And so I did. And so we've visited back and forth for quite a while. And he's now the Secretary of Interior. And he was quoted as saying that, dealing with China and making sure we have enough fossil fuels are the real problems right now. And we'll have plenty of time to take care of climate change once those are dealt with. And like, whoa, is that wrong? I think he might still take an email or a letter from me.
Another comment.
Yep.
I want to put in a plug for the movie coming up on the 3rd Thursday called Merchants of Doubt. I actually read the book. It's a great book. And it's about the organized efforts to feed disinformation and put doubt on top of the scientific evidence. And they actually named people in the cigarette industry who are out just spreading enough disinformation and causing enough doubt that nobody could do anything. And same thing was happening with the oil industry. I mean, there's a lot of motivation there for just
claiming that everything's wrong. That is right. So anyway, I recommend the movie or reading the book even.
Yeah, thank you. It's really eye-opening, I think, to learn how this tobacco industry, again, they were making lots of money and people were dying and from it. And their goal was just to sow as much doubt as possible so they could keep making that money. And then now the fossil fuel industry, which I think has way more money at stake than the tobacco industry had, um, they're going to try to hang on as long as they can. And I'm not sure who said this, but the idea that the decision makers at fossil fuel companies could be facing um, arrest and imprisonment might just cause them to take another thought about it.
Jim, I want to thank you for the time you've taken. I'm going to get back visible here to be with us today. Um, I've watched the eyes of the people here, and there's a lot of interest in what we've been talking about. And the way you've done this has been much more discussion oriented instead of a lecture, which we often do get from a guest. So I appreciate that as well. Are there any last comments from our group?
I'd like to say one thing. I meant to
Please.
mention this when I mentioned about Minnesota. I was talking to my wife about, we should get some lake property in Minnesota because that's a much safer place to be from climate change. Um, and I was talking to Doug, Greg, Climate One. I'm forgetting his name right now, but and I asked him about it, and he initially said, "Well, Michigan or Minnesota, there's a lot of fresh water, etc." But he said the real key is to be in a community. And he told the story. He works in San Francisco, but he lives in Marin somewhere, and there was fire approaching where he lived, and he had no ability to get home, and his son was there, and he called a neighbor and said, "Hey, can you give my son a ride out of there?" And the neighbor did, and it's like that community, and it seems like at Pika you have a lot of great community building stuff, so um, seems like a great place to live.
I moved into Sun City, Lincoln Hills about a little more than a year ago, and I've been trying to make inroads there to raise the consciousness about the climate issues. And what I've observed, and I'm in a group now, it's called the Left Leaning Ladies. The good thing is this group has gone from 300 and something to 500 and something in like just the time I've lived there. So as soon as Trump won, this group started getting a lot bigger, which is great. But I've wanted to put on a PowerPoint for them on one thing or another to do with climate. And the hard thing is that they do every month. We have a dinner, and every month we have some programming, and the programming is always about what's happening with the government. It's what's happening in the federal government, and specifically Trump, and um, everybody is very wrought up over what's going on with Trump. But they say, well, we'll get to the climate after we handle all these other things. We got to take care of, all the bad things that are happening, which is very tempting. But, most of the bad things that are happening, as terrible as they are, aren't directly likely to kill us. Whereas we're looking at an existential threat globally and not just with our species, of course. So I don't know what thoughts you have about how to convince people to put the whole climate thing on a higher level of importance.
I have a couple
Anybody in
thoughts.
the audience has.
I have a couple thoughts. One is that research shows that when when people are talked to about climate change um, by somebody they know, um, they tend to become more open to worrying about climate change. So that's why we put a lot of energy into the our effective climate conversations. Um, and even when people learn to have a conversation, they go out and have a conversation with somebody, and it doesn't seem to impact them. It could, because that's how you get people to change. I want to say something else that could be construed as political. So I was listening to Kim Stanley Robinson, the science fiction writer. He wrote um, the
Ministry for the Future.
Thank you, the Ministry for the Future. And I heard him speak, and uh, he said a couple things. One is that he was speaking, he was doing some speaking with the academies, the West Point, et cetera. And he said, as a former left-wing rabble, he was surprised that he was putting some of his hope in the academies, because um, those students are being introduced to war crimes and the idea that um, they should make a decision rather than just saying, well, I'm obeying orders. And then he said something that really struck me. He said, I'm giving a lot of money to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I just think the crowds that she and Bernie Sanders are getting when they do these trips gives me hope. So I I'm looking for politicians to support who I am convinced will not let me down.
Well, once again, Jim, thank you for your time with us today. Hope you can hear the applause, because it's genuine.